Today's subject is beat reporting, how to develop sources and leverage them to break exclusive enterprise stories. And I'll do a brief introduction of Jim and Chuck, and then I'll let them speak and tell you a little bit about their career and what they're up to now. Jim is a reporter for the Associated Press, covers federal law enforcement and other topics. He's been in newspapers for a while and was a part of a team at the Baton Rouge Advocate that won a Pulitzer Prize for its reporting there. So we're pleased to have Jim today with us. Jim, welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And then with Jim is Chuck Williams. Chuck and Jim go way back and working together in newspapers. Chuck spent 30 years covering news and sports here in Columbus at the Ledger-Enquirer, led the newspaper's award-winning coverage of the 1996 Olympics, and also his work on the gender integration of the U.S. Army Ranger School was nominated by the Ledger for a Pulitzer Prize. And now Chuck, in transitioning from print to TV, is using video and sound, as well as his strong writing and reporting techniques to tell great stories for us and break stories on a nightly basis for us. So we're so excited to have both Jim and Chuck with us today. And so if you don't, Jim, why don't you take the floor here momentarily and just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're up to now, and what, you know, a little bit about your career, how you came to do the work you're doing.
Yeah, well, you mentioned I'm working with the Associated Press in New York City, staying pretty busy covering federal law enforcement, the Southern District of New York, but pretty high profile cases. Has taken up a lot of the time recently. Michael Cohen has been a big hit recently. Give me 1 second if you would.
Yeah.
Chuck, take over for me.
Yeah, so Chuck, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I like Gene said, 30 years here. I was an editor. I was a Metro editor, and in 2000, I made the decision to go back to reporting, and it's the best decision I've ever made. I think it turned out to save my career because a lot of editors got whacked as newspapers started downsizing, particularly at smaller and mid-sized papers, and reporters didn't. And there was a reason that some reporters didn't. It's like you had to be out there to get the stories. But one thing I want to say about Jim, and that I'm lucky to do what I do, but to me, if I'm y'all interns looking at this, Jim is the classic case. Jim, as you can see, the Braves hat behind Jim. Jim's a baseball fan. We share that. We both are long-suffering Braves fans. But Jim is the classic ball player in a sense. Jim came out of school. He had the skills. He went to single A ball in Odessa. Then he went to double A ball in Columbus. Then he went to triple A ball in New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And now he's essentially playing for the Yankees and playing well. And I use that to show the progression of a career. Jim's career is something y'all should really look at because it does follow kind of the baseball minor coming through the minors to me. And that's what I got to say.
Well, anyway, I think Chuck may have overstated that a little bit, but I have a lot of gratitude for the time Chuck and I spent together in Columbus, Georgia. And I would describe my career as saying, in many ways I took the stairs rather than the elevator. I mean, I bounced around to a number of different small papers, started out at pretty much the smallest newspaper that you could start at, a bi-weekly outside New Orleans, making $9 an hour, and bounced from there to a paper in West Texas, and then ended up in Georgia working with Chuck before going back to Louisiana, and now I'm in New York.
Fantastic. Chuck, if you don't mind, share a little bit briefly here about this point about you making a transition from print only to television and using sound and pictures to also tell your stories, because quite a number of the students on the call are looking at careers in television, but I try to stress with them and also our young reporters the importance of the sound journalistic skills that are needed for any reporter, and pulling on that experience from your print days and your strong writing skills.
I like to tell people they hired me because I'm so good looking, but obviously that's not the case. The thing about it is, the thing I've learned, this has been the hardest transition I've ever made in my career. And I did it at 59 when a lot of people don't make these kinds of transitions. Jim will appreciate this. This time of my career, I thought I'd be sitting next to Dusty Nix writing editorials and opining about Columbus and its figures. That didn't happen. The industry didn't move that way at the end of my career. So I had an opportunity to come over here. It's the hardest thing I've done, but I will tell you this, I couldn't have done it without being a reporter, finding stories, going after stories, knowing how to get stories, and writing skills. And the one thing I've noticed in our newsroom, the reporters that do coming out of school that do the best are the ones that can write. I mean, and you think of writing on the newspaper level, but the ones who can write can convey a message quicker. It's easier on the producers to deal with reporters because they're not constantly rewriting, and the reporter has a better chance to get their story on the air and to get it in a way that they're going to get more exposure if they're really solid writers. And that runs counter to what you may be thinking about TV.
Makes sense. So you both made a point about your start and learning how to do what you do and improve your craft. And so that to turn the conversation perhaps more pointedly toward beat reporting, what do you think that, for someone just starting out in the industry to learn how to develop, sources in order to have those great story ideas and eventually turning them into great publishable material, what are one or two or three of the most important things for new people to understand how stories work, because it's not just you see something on the web and you say, oh, it's a great idea, and you go make a little mini movie about it. How do you develop original stories? What's as a young reporter, if y'all wouldn't mind starting the conversation there?
You go, Jim.
I think you have to treat everybody as a potential source. I mean, everybody you come into contact with on a regular basis, on a daily basis, checking in with people, making things less transactional. Don't be reactive about it. Check in on a proactive basis, even when you don't need anything. Do things in person when you can. I mean, it's more difficult during COVID for sure. And answer the phone, return your calls, return emails.
Makes sense. Chuck?
And exactly what he said. And some of my best sources were folks that might have been my daughter's little league softball coach. Believe it or not, the baristas at my coffee shop constantly gave me stories during the tail end of my ledger career. They knew everything that was going on. I go into Iron Bank and I have two or three baristas. I'm mispronouncing. Two or three guys that made my coffee that would say, hey, did you hear about this? Or so-and-so happened last night. And you just follow those leads. And, a good friend of mine is Cal Calloway, and Cal's the managing editor of Fox 5 in Atlanta. And Cal, on sourcing and on stories, Cal has offered the best advice. Sometimes you just go. You hear, hey, there may be a bad wreck, or there may be this or that, and you're sitting there trying to confirm. Sometimes just go. Just go to where you've been told it is. And that's how you build sources, because sources, particularly in the law enforcement communities, sources trust people that they see and they get it right. And you usually get it right if you're on the scene. Right, Jim?
That's something I've stolen from Chuck for my entire career is his phrase, I'm just trying to get it right. I can't tell you how many times I heard Chuck on the phone trying to pry something loose from somebody. And what his reasoning always boiled down to was, I'm trying to get it right. I'm not trying to make you look bad. I'm not trying to make me look good. I'm trying to hold a mirror up to this thing. And I think most people want to tell their stories. I mean, most people want to talk to you. Last week, I took a Greyhound out to Allentown, Pennsylvania, to talk to somebody who's in a Turkish intelligence agency, somebody who has no business talking to me about anything that we talked about. And it took me a year to get this guy to be willing to sit down and talk to me. And when he started talking to me, he talked to me for 3 hours about things that he wasn't supposed to talk to me about. But I think that's the
when's that story running?
But that's another thing, you stay on people, because sometimes in journalism, no means not right now. And somebody says, I can't talk to you, but you stay in touch with people. And, one thing that's kind of critical in our line of work is, the news cycle recycles and disappears, but the people's stories don't. And so maybe the focus has shifted to something else. And 24 hours later, once the pack is chasing a different story, you can go back and knock on the door again and see how this person's doing. And, there'll be follow-up stories that can be generated that way.
I'll give you an example of how Jim and I did that. Jim and I covered corruption in the Muskogee County courts. And I had already started that. We had the Georgia Judicial Qualifications Commission, which was the watchdog agency for the judges in Georgia, had a bulldog investigator named Richard Hyde. And Jim and I remember Richard fondly. The thing about our government center is there's one way in and one way out. So once Jim and I knew Hyde was in the building, one of us would stay down in the lobby, one start roaming the halls. But it was interesting. We had 2 judges that had some major issues. And the first one was gone just about the time Jim started. His name was Bobby Johnston. And Judge Johnston had a drinking problem, and he was also carousing with a court reporter. There's just a lot of issues there. And Judge Johnston finally got caught by Hyde. He cornered him in the parking lot. They had a 2.5-hour lunch in Bobby's car. He walked in and resigned immediately after sitting in the car with Richard Hyde. We had another reporter that was covering courts a little bit then, not Jim or I, and he called Johnson. Johnson just said, "Hey, I'm resigning for personal reasons. I want to go spend more time with my family." I knew that wasn't accurate, and I knew what Hyde's truck went right. I started driving through hotel parking lots looking for Richard's truck, and I found it a block from my house at the Marriott. And I walked in the lobby, asked for his room, rang his room, and he came down. He laid out exactly what happened. So at 9 o'clock, and Johnson also had a penchant for scotch. At 9 o'clock, I called the judge, and he was probably several scotches into his worst day ever. And he said, "I've already talked to somebody at the Ledger." I said, "No, I want to talk to you about it. I think I've got some more information." And I proceeded to ask about the conversation. I went through the whole thing. And he would dodge me. And finally, I asked one question. I said, "Did Richard Hyde force you to resign?" And he wouldn't answer the question. I asked it a second time. He wouldn't answer the question. I asked it a third time, and Judge Johnson's conscience finally got the best of him. He said, "Chuck, what do you want me to say?" And I said, "Judge, I want you to do the same thing you ask anybody that gets in a witness stand in your courtroom. Just tell me the truth." And he did. He laid it all out. And it was like he regretted it the next day, but I knew what it was, and he knew that I knew. And that's sometimes the best way to get information is if the source knows you know more than what you're asking, they're going to open up to you sometimes. Right, Jim?
Absolutely. A short story along those lines I can share regarding a body that was found in the Mississippi, at the end of the Mississippi River, the end of the earth, in Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana. And there was a reporter who had just moved to New Orleans from New York City. He'd been working for the Huffington Post for 5 years or so, had kept his Brooklyn area code, and had just a very transactional way of approaching newspapering. And when he called the coroner for the information on the body, the coroner hung up on him, just wouldn't even take the call. And basically, when he would get on the phone with people, he would announce himself, and he would say, "My name is Matt. I'm a reporter with the New Orleans Advocate," and just launch straight into demanding information. And this reporter was with us a couple of days, and he asked. I had the opportunity to have lunch with him a day or two after he was hired. And I said, you know, this may be the approach that worked for you in New York, that you just call and it's transactional. That doesn't really fly in the Bayou. That's not really how we do things. I said, the next time you speak with this coroner, you might want to ask him about, you know, the umpiring that he does on the weekend, or his daughter in high school. And he looked at me over lunch and he said, well, how do you know those things? And I said, well, because when I call him, I talk to him. I don't just pump him for information. And that was, you know, I hope that he took something from that, which was, you know, don't just call people on deadline. I mean, you know, there's an activity that I refer to as taking care of sources, which means, you know, you're going through town, you don't need anything, you go have coffee with them. And it's the conversations you have with these people when it's not you needing something right now that I think they remember. And that's when you make progress, I think, in forging these personal relationships that you can return to when the world is ending. You know, when I found myself at the Associated Press, I was the only person in the building at the Manhattan headquarters when Jeffrey Epstein killed himself in a federal prison. And I had to turn to sourcing that I hadn't talked to in 5 or 6 years to confirm that story. And I just called people and said, I need you to do it. I need you to do this for me. I need you, if I've earned any kind of capital with you at all, I need you to call somebody who can find this out, because my career is hanging in the balance right now. So that's the kind of thing you want to, and it's a cliche thing to say, but it's also something I wrote down, which is, you know, don't throw away phone numbers. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but you know, last week I ended up having to call somebody in New Iberia, Louisiana, where I worked over a decade ago, a district attorney. A guy used to be a line prosecutor there, and he's now the district attorney in Iberia Parish. That's the thing. When you build this network, you're advancing in your career. These people are advancing too. The guy who is the spokesman right now for, you know, the United States Postal Service might someday be U.S. attorney. You don't have any idea. And I think Chuck can speak to that too. That people end up in positions of power. Sometimes somebody you played softball with ends up being a federal judge.
It's crazy how that happens, but you know, it's funny because Jim talks about still working sources in places that he no longer lives. Every now and then I'll be talking to somebody and we'll be either doing some source stuff and they'll go, oh, I heard from your boy Mustian yesterday. And I was like, what's Jim working on down here? you know, and it's like, you know, the last one was a state senator from Harris County. I'm like, why are you talking to Mustian? What's he want to talk to you about? But you know, and the thing about it is you've got to follow, you know, this is one thing I tell everybody coming in as a young reporter. It's easy to do the first story. Y'all are all trained. You can walk into this room right now and do the first story. Can you do the second story? It's pretty easy to do the second story with the same source. When you get to the 45th story, and you do with some local officials and some people that are, you know, in the know of things, when you get to the 40th or 50th story with those people, you'll never be able to do it if they don't trust you, because they will have cut you off long before that. Am I right, Jim?
Absolutely. You know, I think another thing I wanted to share was, you know, as far as a pattern of seeking out news sources, I think it's beneficial to sort of seek out the disaffected, if you will. I mean, people, you know, it's important in talking about sourcing. Everybody who's talking to you is typically, or coming to you proactively, typically has some kind of axe to grind. So you're always viewing things through that prism. Why is this person talking to me? What are they trying to achieve? That's fine. That doesn't mean that those people aren't in a position to know things, though. And see, everybody is in a position to know something. But, you know, finding those people who are talking because they feel there's some perceived injustice. Why would somebody in federal law enforcement talk to you when there's rules, that some laws often that you know, forbid them from doing so? Well, they perceive some kind of whistleblower protection. They perceive the injustice happening in their agency to be more urgent than the rules forbidding them from speaking. So you look for situations like that. Sometimes you actively look for situations like that. Who's suing the FBI this month? Who sued the FBI last month? What kind of stories do they have to tell? So I think, you know, there's, and this is another local example. And Chuck, I don't know if I should call his name, but I remember a particular gadfly who used to hang around the newsroom in downtown Columbus. And when I got to Georgia, Chuck warned me about him, and I said, you know, this guy's calling me. He's got these tips. He wants to hang out. And Chuck said, you are wasting your time with that guy. Don't take him to coffee. And I didn't listen to Chuck. I took him to coffee. And, you know, it turned out I ended up having kind of regular lunch with this guy in Phoenix City, Alabama. And, you know, about 6 months into our relationship, I learned that this guy was actually a confidential informant for the district attorney's office in Russell County. And it just, that put him in a position to know who was testifying before the grand jury. And 9 times out of 10, when this guy called, it was completely meaningless. He'd want to talk about some photo shoot he was involved in 35 years ago, just, you know. But 1 time out of 10, he'd have something that resembled a news tip, and it was worth running down. And I mean, you could argue about whether that was the best use of time, but, you know, I've said yes to situations like that. And I've talked to people. The crazier they are, the more likely I am to return their call. And I engage with people who criticize me. I think that's important too. I mean, you know, as recently as yesterday, had a woman in Nashville, Tennessee, reach out to me on Twitter and said, "Shame on you." And I mean, I guess I've kind of gotten to the point where I don't even know what people are criticizing. I don't even know what story she was referring to. So I very, very candidly responded to her, and I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't know what I did, but something's in the paper in Nashville, Tennessee that I did that she didn't like. But I think there's a fine line there that I want to stress. You know, another thing I learned in Georgia was you can't get into the pig pen without getting muddy. And I think Chuck knows that. You don't want to get into a situation where you're you know, you're just slinging mud at people, because that won't be pretty. But don't run away from people who have constructive criticism of you. Pick up the phone and listen to somebody who has a different point of view or has something to say about what you've done, because it does a lot of things. It improves your perspective, but that person also is another potential source.
Well,
yeah.
And I agree with you. And, you know, one of the biggest pig pens for me was somewhere that you were a little more comfortable, and it was Doug Pullen's office. And, you know, we would go in there, and sometimes it's good to work with another reporter. And Jim and I were a classic good cop, bad cop. And Jim was the good cop. I was the bad cop. Judge Pullen despised me, but he always let me in the office. I got in quicker when I had Jim with me. But the day that Richard Hyde got Pullen's resignation, which was the second one he got there, Jim and I were literally in the waiting room when the investigator walked out of the office with the signed letter that Pullen was going to resign 2 days later. And Jim and I both looked at each other like, what have we done? Pullen's going to come out here and shoot us. I mean, we didn't know what was going on, but we went in there and he yelled at me and talked to Jim, and we got our story. Is that pretty much, did I describe it well?
I think that's right. Another kind of rule of thumb that you know, for source building and dealing with sources, I mean, you're going to get into situations that are difficult, because particularly on beat reporting, you know, this concept of not biting the hand that feeds you. You know, how hard can you push somebody and still get information from them? And I think it's important that when you have like a little alarm go off in your head, and you feel that tug that you're afraid to ask a question, that's essentially the rule that you need to ask that question. I mean, it's not 100% hard rule of thumb, but I think, you know, if you find yourself in a position where, you know, you feel like you're kind of soft pedaling it, you feel like it's a tough question, ask the tough question. Don't be afraid to ask it. People respect you more for doing your job and for writing tough, critical stories that hold people accountable. I've got there are law enforcement people whose careers I've ended with exposés who still call me just today for absolutely no other reason than to just catch up and talk and see what's going on. But I think people appreciate when you ask tough questions. This is kind of unrelated, but I also wrote this down too because I think it's important and something I struggle with, which is time management and prioritizing stories on the beat. But one thing that's helped me through the years is to keep a list of story ideas. And I still have stuff on my list that I didn't get done when I was in Columbus, Georgia. I mean,
Can I have that? Can I have that list? I want that list.
Some of the stuff is going to be, it could just be a question. It could just be a question you have. I mean, one thing I wrote down recently, why are there so few women in law enforcement just generally, and why is that number becoming even less by the day? And I think there's a ton of answers for it. It's not, maybe it's one, maybe it's three stories. But even if you're just sitting around, you could just write yourself an email that's sort of like a note to self, and then you could add it to your list later on. But I think that it's important to have a working list, and you can prioritize these things. You can say, this is the lower hanging fruit. This is something that's on the back burner. But that's something that's helped me in my career.
I had one question to tie in that's a number of things that y'all have brought forth. For a young reporter starting out, you both talked about this idea of not being transactional, about taking care of sources. And you talked about just now about a very specific technique of keeping this story list. So, in the newsroom, we're cognizant of having a list of like, here are all the beat calls we need to make today. So is there a tool that you used or still use in terms of being disciplined to know today it's time to do these 5 things to keep my system working? Is there a specific thing you do?
I mean, it's as unsophisticated as a bunch of yellow sticky notes that are on my computer screen. I mean, I keep a written like calendar, like a planner. I can't do anything. I'm a dinosaur in that respect. I can't do any kind of Google reminder, anything like that. For me, writing it out it makes it more likely that I'll remember it. So I try to make notes to call people on a regular basis, particularly if there's a guy in the DEA that I need to call today about some positions that he sent me. I haven't read them yet, but just to check in with him and let him know that that I haven't forgotten about him. I think that's an important thing too. To not ghost your sources. But that's a daily struggle for me. Is we and particularly now in the just crazy sort of news environment we find ourselves in. You will find, I think almost definitely, I can promise you that every day you work in this job, there's going to be more news than you can cover. And if you're anything like me, you're triaging it. You're addressing the most urgent things that have to go to the wire right now, today, and then hopefully having time the next day to return to some of these other things.
Chuck, what about you? Do you use any kind of tools or techniques to
I write stories down. I've found, and most of y'all are a little younger than my children. I got daughters that are 28 and 30 right now, and they do the Google reminders, Google Notes. I've got a notepad by my bedside. I think of stuff in the middle of the night. Some of the best leads I've ever written are in the middle of the night. Sometimes now my wife thinks I'm nuts. I will pick up the phone and dictate a lead into a phone at 2 a.m. And she's like, who are you talking to? And, and I don't know if any of y'all, I don't know in your parts of the world, have y'all seen the Jake from State Farm commercial? Do y'all know that?
Yeah.
I've got my own Jake from State Farm. The John Ossoff, who's one of the new U.S. senators from Georgia. John's PR guy is a guy named Jake Bess. He's now press secretary for him in Washington. And Jake is a young guy, probably 25, 26, and just like Ossoff, he's press secretary for a U.S. senator in D.C. Those guys, they're the dogs that caught the bus. And Jake and I established a relationship because he was running against our former mayor in the primary. So I took a great interest in that race, and I began covering that race heavily in the primary. And so I got to know Ossoff because I had to be fair and go both sides. And one thing you got to do on the TV side, Jim, there's a fair balance rule I didn't know about. If you give somebody 15 seconds, you better think about 15 for the other one. I did not know about that.
That's a law or just a guideline?
FCC guidance
Wow.
is, yeah, fair, equal time is the concept.
And of course, somebody refuses that's.
Yeah, you've done your part in offering them. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, so Jake and I were constant contact, and he was a texter, I was a texter, and literally at 1:30 in the morning, I'm sitting there and I'm texting with him because I couldn't sleep. And my wife walks in the room and she goes, "Who are you talking to?" I said, "Jake from Ossoff." He goes, "What?" I said, "No, seriously, look, here's the text. I'm talking to Jake from Ossoff." But I will tell you this, I'm working on a story right now with them now that they're, it's interesting. Jim says people get into positions of power. You may know them when they're not in the position. You build your relationship, and then all of a sudden, boom, I now have a press secretary that will take my text and my phone calls immediately. And we've got a situation here where a Columbus legend, Colonel Ralph Puckett, he was kind of the first of the Army Rangers, and he was in a major battle in Korea in 1950, 71 years ago. He got the Silver Star for his heroics in that battle. He should have gotten the Medal of Honor. Silver Star is the second highest honor you can receive. The Medal of Honor is the highest military honors. And in the budget that President Trump, the military budget that President Trump vetoed, and then the veto was overridden, Puckett was in that budget to receive the Medal of Honor. It's now in a bureaucratic land. It's got to go back to the Pentagon and to President Biden for signing. I put a call into Ossoff and asked the question. I didn't do it as, "Hey, you need to do this." I called and said, "Hey, can your office check and see what the status of Colonel Puckett's Medal of Honor?" And they did their research. They're now running like crazy today because Colonel Puckett he's 94 and he's in failing health. It would be sad if he got the Medal of Honor posthumously. So I think they're asking questions now about, hey, what happens here? And and all I did was put a question to a press secretary, and there may be a story to come out of this very soon. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But that's something I wrote down in the middle of the night. I've been working on that. I mean, that's how I do that kind of stuff, Jim.
I had one other. Jim, you were going to say something to follow up on that?
Oh, no.
No, I had one question to follow up on something you both touched on as well. And it's the phrase I wrote down here is know before you go. So this idea of acquiring information, either through other sources or through documents before you ever sit down with the primary subject of your interview and story, so that they may not know as much as you know before you do that interview. So how do you go about preparing yourself for that kind of an interview?
Well, I think a rule of thumb is you really can't write about anything before you know everything that's been written about it. And you should just have that as your frame of mind, because I mean, first of all, you don't know whether you're breaking. You don't know how to frame something. Is this something nobody's ever known about? And I tend to. This is also a struggle for me. Knowing when to kind of stop researching and to start writing, because you can get really deep into it. I think it's okay to go into a situation like that knowing more than you're putting on. And you don't ever want to actively mislead the subject of an interview, but you do want to see how forthcoming they'll be. And that gets to an interesting dynamic that we encounter a lot with, particularly with law enforcement officials, which there's a big difference between revealing information and confirming information. So a lot of times we'll get a tip or something firmed up from one or two sources, and then we'll go to somebody to confirm it, which is a different activity and viewed differently sometimes under the law even, you know, than divulging something. You know, I have a very helpful source in New York who would never tell me, he would never tell me anything I didn't know, but he's kind of like a guy who, you know, at the end of the world, I mean, at the end of the day, the Associated Press does not want to write something that's wrong. And he's somebody who, and isn't going to write something that's wrong. And he's somebody who will tell you that's wrong. And, you know, I've had him tell me that, you know, late at night before something runs, he'll call me and say, you know, look, I can't see, you can't write that, you know, because it's just not, that's not the case. But he's not somebody you're going to be able to go to find out what's going on unless you already know what's going on. So I think, you know, I think the rule is be as prepared as you possibly can, and don't be afraid to you know, to confront people if they, you know, everybody's spinning it. They're you know, in a certain way. So you go into that interview and somebody you know, comes at you with a bunch of spin, push back, and the more prepared you are, the more homework you've done, you know, you're in a better position to do that.
Chuck, you'll need to unmute because we could hear Tom coming through behind you and it was drowning out Jim. So unmute. Go ahead.
Okay. The most important thing, I agree with everything Jim just said. There are two things I would add to that. One is you may know way more than you put on the air or you write today. But sometimes the best way to break big stories, and you know, Watergate's cliche, but you go with what you got when you got it. And you just keep peeling back the layers of that onion. And I think that's one of the things you see really good reporters do. They will go with what they got today, knowing, okay, 2-3 days from now, I'm probably going to be able to confirm this piece of it, but I don't have this solid. Or this can come out in layers and it's going to make a lot more sense. And there may be a pot of gold at the end of those layers. I mean, and then the other thing is, and I think it was Voltaire that said it. I'm quoting Voltaire, Jim. I've become a TV guy now. But don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And that's something you've really got to keep in your mind and reporting. We all know what the standards are. It's got to be accurate. It's got to be fair. It's got to be in context. Most of us want to get it perfect. We may not be able to do that. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good when it comes to reporting.
And don't be afraid to tell people what you don't know. Sometimes that's a big part of the story. You know, I've been one great thing about my job at the AP is because we publish everywhere. I'm still writing. I'm still breaking news in Louisiana. And you know, last year I wrote about the death of an African American man who was killed by the Louisiana State Police, Ronald Green. And it was just, I mean, it's just been nothing short of a cover up. There's a federal civil rights investigation into his death, and talk about peeling back the onion. This was a death that these Louisiana State Police originally portrayed as, or attributed to a car crash, said that this man had died in a car crash. And then it turns out that it looks very much now that he was beaten to death. And we still actually don't know what happened, but every single time we write about it, we return to what it is we don't know. And we tell people why we don't know it, which is there is body cam footage of Ronald Green's arrest and his death that the state of Louisiana refuses to release. And we would know more about it if they released it, but we don't have that. So what we've written about that, we pieced together through leaks. We've gotten some audio of the body leaked to us that we published, attorneys who've seen it, law enforcement officials familiar with it, whatever you have. But yeah, I would agree with Chuck, but sometimes the news is what's not there.
You know, my advice to you is when you go home to Louisiana, drive the speed limit on I-10.
Well, if y'all don't mind, I do have a couple of Jared Donald, one of our interns, has a couple of questions, a question and then a follow-up that I think would be illuminating for the participants. So Jared, if you want to unmute and ask your first question, and if you send it to me an email, but if you want to ask that, feel free to unmute and ask that first question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for speaking with us today, by the way. It's been really informative. My first question is, what advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career?
Are you going with him?
Yeah, what advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career?
I'll tell you what, I'll start first, since that was 37 years ago. The first thing I do was walk him into a room and tell him he's an idiot. That everything you think you know, you don't know. And that has become the most critical piece of my reporting. And what I would say is my moderate success at it is that I have a pretty good sense. I know what I don't know, and I know my weaknesses. I have a self-awareness. I know what I don't do well. And I didn't know that at 23 years old in the newsroom of the Enterprise Ledger in South Alabama. I thought I knew everything. I didn't know anything.
What about you, Jim?
I think that it's a fascinating question. I think to some extent I had a tendency as a young reporter and somebody who was working at really small newsrooms, Louisiana, Texas, and Georgia, to sort of underestimate maybe my own ability and also underestimate what it was that we were working on. I always sort of had this ideal of the story being in Washington, D.C. or New York. And I think what I've learned, having been to several different places, is that the story, there's important stories all over the country. There's tremendously important stories in Columbus, Georgia, and in Odessa, Texas, and in New Orleans, and in New York every single day. And there's this sort of pack mentality that comes with the National Press Corps. They just sort of, it's like watching a group of 8-year-olds chase a soccer ball. I mean, they just go, they have no focus. They just chase one story every single day. And, I think what I would go back to and say is, what you're doing is okay. What you're doing is worthwhile. And it's not, some substandard thing. I think all of those stories are worthwhile.
It's great advice. And Jared, you had another question, which I found really fascinating. If you wouldn't mind go ahead and asking your second question.
Sure. My second question was, what was your first win, that made you confident that you were doing the right thing?
So what win did you achieve that made you confident you were doing the right thing?
Well, this is kind of a funny one. It's going to seem a little bit silly now, but this actually remains my favorite headline I've ever been associated with in my career. I worked for a college newspaper called The Current Sauce in Natchitoches, Louisiana, a place most of you probably never even heard of. And the biggest story of my entire news tenure in Natchitoches involved the abrupt closure of PJ's Coffee House. And that might not sound like a big deal, but when you've got a lot of young high schools, there was Louisiana schools right across the street from it, and the kids would invariably go there and rely on the Wi-Fi, to even have access to the internet or a gathering place. One day we woke up and PJ's Coffee House had closed without explanation. There was a sign on the door that said it was closed. There was all this scuttlebutt about what may have happened. And the newspaper staff went about interviewing everybody who had ever worked there. And, this picture emerged of an owner of a coffee house who was just sort of very profligate and also very, mistreated his employees. But then on a complete whim, and just, I guess, owing to just how skeptical I am about things, I decided to file a records request with the police department involving any sort of police activity that had happened at this coffee house for the entire semester. And I get a call back from into our newsroom from the Natchitoches Police Department that said, your records request has been fulfilled. Do you want to come by and see the records? We've got about 36 pages of police reports. And I tried to feign, of course, yeah, I'll be right over to look at them. I had absolutely no idea what was going to be in these reports. And I drive over to the police department, and this business had been broken into like 4 times in a month, and each time the coffee house had lost every single dollar it had inside of it. And there were these investigations into who might be doing this, but it was a complete whim. and we ran a front page story. And I'm coming to the headline that I loved so much that I wrote at 4:30 in the morning: PJ's grinds to a halt. And that it remains the best headline I've ever been associated with. But the thrill of telling people something that they didn't previously know. There's this assumption. I grew up with it. Maybe all of you aren't this way, but I always assumed that things that we needed to know, we knew. Something that was important would just be in the newspaper, because why? Right? But what you learn in this job is that it's the absolute opposite of that. It's as arbitrary sometimes as how hard investigative reporters go at it. What is Chuck going to come up with today? That might actually determine what people in the Chattahoochee Valley actually know. And for me, seeing those newspapers fly off the newsstand that day, you could not find a copy of the Current Sauce, and hearing at the local, pub, people talking about this story, people just unaware that we were even there, but having informed the conversation, that was something that for me became intoxicating, and it's a big part of why I do what I do.
Awesome.
Mine is similar to that. I like to get places other reporters can't, because what Jim described as the 8-year-olds chasing the soccer ball, I hate it. I despise it. It drives me nuts. And it even happens in small towns like Columbus and small markets like Columbus. Don't run with the herd. But I used to really try to get people to let me do stuff. And years ago, Bill Curry was the head football coach at the University of Alabama. And if any of y'all know anything about Coach Curry, he's coached at Georgia Tech, Georgia State, Kentucky. But he was at Alabama, and it was a successful, unsuccessful run. He couldn't beat Auburn. He could beat everybody else. He couldn't beat Auburn. And that, you're not going to last in Tuscaloosa long. They have a superiority complex that way. But he came to Dothan, and he met with the Wiregrass Booster Club. And I heard that he was going to speak to Westgate Baptist Church, and I think that's the name of the church, the next Sunday morning. And he was going to give the sermon. And I'm sitting there going, I want to hear what sermon the football coach of Alabama has to say. And I worked the sports information people, I worked the church, and they were like, no media allowed. And finally, the SID called me and said, Coach Curry saw what you wrote today about the thing. Why don't you join us in the morning? So, I could have gone and sat there and done it just as guy. And then Coach Curry talked to me about how his faith and football kind of intersected. And I got that, right after he had delivered this sermon. And it wasn't a football coach sermon. He could have been a pretty good preacher. And if you don't follow Bill Curry on Twitter, I suggest you do. He's an enlightened old man, and he has a lot of knowledge that can be passed along. But that's mine.
Great. Anybody else? Any interns present that had a question that sparked? Ryan, I see you raising your hand. Go ahead.
This is kind of for both of you guys, and I'm sure all the other interns can vouch for me that as a student reporter, a lot of times the reputation that student reporters have is very low, and the reputation of the newsroom you're reporting for it's always a little tougher to get those first interviews. So I was curious for you guys that are now working at stations and organizations that have a higher reputation, has it been easier for you guys to find and secure those interviews that we might not be able to get, but you might?
Handle it.
Without question. I mean, sometimes at the highest levels, it can be as maddening as the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal are getting background. They're getting backgrounders from Congress. They're getting backgrounders from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it's so exclusive and so geared towards a specific audience that that the reporters who aren't part of it don't even know it's happening. So, I mean, the answer is yes. And, it's with the Associated Press. I mean, you get situations where sometimes everybody's heard of you, sometimes nobody's heard of you. But I think for your purposes, I would encourage you to just go for the interview. Just, request it. It doesn't really matter who you're representing. I mean, I can speak for having worked at papers you've never even heard of. That if you ask people, people will still come to the table and they'll answer the questions. But it does get easier. When you can point to, when I call somebody, they consider it the AP many times. I mean, I reach out on a daily basis. I reach out to people I've never heard of. They've never heard of me. So, yeah.
I would agree with what Jim said.
Grace, I saw you raise your hand as well.
Okay, so first of all, thank you guys so much for doing this. It's really nice to hear from both of you from different experiences, different years in your service. So I have a question, individual questions for each of you. So I'm going to start with Jim first, if that's okay. So Jim, you're a very personal person with your job and as a human in general. So my question is, how do you keep things personal and non-transactional without seeming so fake or just interested in the story? Where is the fine line that you walk while still prioritizing getting this information while also prioritizing that this is a person and can continue to be a valuable relationship down the line?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. You cannot separate yourself as a person from yourself as a reporter. It's sort of this, it's idealistic. We in journalism textbooks, we talk about it. But when, you're probably already encountering it. I mean, when you get out into the real world, you'll realize that everybody you're dealing with is a person, you're a person. And I think the best thing to do is to embrace those things. I mean, be aware of, whatever your biases are. One of the biggest problems we face, one of the biggest challenges we face in journalism is diversification. And we have to know who we are as journalists and as newsrooms to know, what we need to add to that. When I was in Columbus, Georgia with Chuck, I had one of the toughest assignments I've ever had. And I know Chuck remembers as well. I had to witness an execution of a man named Troy Davis. And that is something that I still have nightmares about to this day. It is literally the most challenging thing I've ever had to do on the face of this planet. It's something that will always be with me. And rather than deny that assignment has had the kind of impact that it had on me, I am aware of that. It doesn't mean that I can't write about capital punishment. What it means is that I'm aware of my own personal views towards capital punishment. But I think, I think the best thing to do is to sort of embrace those things. If you ever get to a point in your career when it becomes easy for you to knock on the door of a woman who has just lost her 2 sons in some senseless gun battle, you should walk away from this job, because you need to be a person to connect with those people.
That's awesome. Awesome. Thank you. That's so true. A lot of people, I feel there's such a form of empathy, with every story, because things are so personal, no matter what, even if it isn't something as super big as an execution, or it's like you said, just knocking on somebody who's just lost someone. But thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah. Let me just add one important part too, because you're going to be tempted to do this. You're going to see a lot of people doing this.
Okay.
On Twitter, you don't have, so as much as you should be a person and embrace those things, you don't have to weigh in on everything on Twitter. The thing that drives me absolutely crazy, and maybe Chuck feels this way too, is to see this sort of punditry that has taken over journalists, where we feel like in order to be part of the conversation, this sort of branding thing that happens, right? I need to have a voice on Twitter. Be very careful about that, because there are reporters for very high profile news organizations. It was a very recent example of an editor being fired for expressing an opinion on Twitter. But your Twitter account, and my approach to this has been, don't show as little about your personal opinion about something as you can on that, because once that's out there, that's there forever. And somebody can brand you. You just don't want to be associated with one side of it. If you're going to be a dispassionate arbiter of these things, the sort of referee, if you will, which is what we're doing in journalism, then, you know, weighing in on as little as possible, I think is important. So that was just the caveat. You know, it could be that, you know, an assignment has had a profound impact on you. And I think there's a venue for expressing that and describing it. It may just not be an 11:38 p.m. tweet with what you're feeling about something.
Awesome. That makes sense. It's like you said, it's like kind of dangerous, and having other people put their opinion on you and like classify you that's
right.
Very territorial for us and for other people as well. So thank you. Great answer. I really appreciate that.
Of course.
My next question for Chuck. So you had a major career change, changing point, turning point in your career. How did you know you were making the right decision for yourself? And what advice would you give to somebody who wants to pursue a big change, but is also like, has that sense of doubt and has that sense of fear in the back of their head with making that crucial turning point for themselves?
Talk to somebody you trust about it. And I will tell you this, from newspapers to TV was the second big change I made. I got out of management in 2000. I talked to a counselor at the Pastoral Institute here, and the macho guy in me that at the point time was 40 years old would never have considered taking a demotion and taking a pay cut. But this guy convinced me, after listening to me, that what I was doing was the right thing for me at the time, and it turned out to be the single best decision I've ever made. Then in fast forward 18 years or to November of 2018, the newspaper industry was in trouble. It still is in trouble. Small papers, particularly those owned by McClatchy, which Columbus Ledger was, were having a lot of financial difficulties. I could see bankruptcy. My boss that I trusted, Diamond Kendrick Holmes, had gotten laid off for no reason at all. You know, I mean, a lot of us were looking for outs. Hannah, I'll tell you this, Alva was one of the first ones to leave. When I saw Alva leave, it's like, okay, that was a spark that went up, going, okay. And then she wasn't the only one. There were others, and everybody figured I would be the guy that turned the lights off. I was the prototypical newspaper guy. Discussion started with Channel 3. It made sense to me. And when the discussion started, I was running from something. I was running as fast and hard as I could to get out of the Ledger Inquirer and to get away from what I thought was a failing industry, what I concluded was a failing industry. The beauty of this is sometimes when you're running and you think you're running away from something, you actually are running to something. When I look at this now, I ran to something that probably saved my life. And I don't say that I'm in better shape, because I had to get in better shape, because one of the things I found out was they didn't use audio in TV. At the newspaper. They use audio here. I was out of shape. My breathing was getting caught on the audio. And I had to be conscious when I was recording people that my heavy breathing as a big guy was getting caught on audio, just things that I would have never thought about. And, but I realized that I was in the right place. The Ledger had become very stagnant. It was mostly old reporters like me. When I left, I had 29 and a half years, and there were 3 people there that had more years than I did. So, and there weren't that many folks, and it was stagnant. The beauty of this place is we have people like all of y'all that are in this room. It's their first job. They're right out of school. Their first time really away from home and on their own, having to pay off their own student loans and pay rent and live life. And, I have found that the greatest benefit of this is I learn every day from y'all. Y'all may watch me and see how I report and see how I do things, but I'm watching y'all, and y'all are helping me with technology. You're helping me with things that I'm not as solid with. And it's actually a trade-off. And in a lot of ways, it's really been fortunate for me that I ended up here. And, and the younger people have energized me and have shown me that we are in good shape in this profession. You know, I didn't think we were for a while. I think we've got quality people that want to do the right thing coming in here. And it's like anything else, the cream's going to rise to the top. It's going to get, you get into a newsroom like this one or in some other first market city that you come to, if you work hard, if you play by the rules, and if you get stories, and you're going to get opportunities, you're going to get great opportunities. And it's kind of cool for me, who's been in a one-horse town most of my career, to see people that, I mean, we got people here that I'll be fully convinced will end up on network in a few years. And, you know, and I mean, I've even made one of those calls years ago when I was a sports editor here. I was competing against the sports director at Channel 3. That sports director is Reese Davis. When Reese left here, he went to Flint, Michigan, and then to ESPN. And when Reese left here, I looked at our sports columnist and I said, in 5 years, he'll be on ESPN. It took 2. Reese was a reporter. He was a solid reporter, and he would beat the newspaper on stories. And it was obvious to me where he was headed. And, you know, and I think when y'all start this, you know, I'll repeat this last thing I'll say. I got to go do a live shot at noon. But last thing I'll say is Mike Burbach was my editor, and Hannah, ask Alva about Mike Burbach. No, Alva, Mike was before her, so never mind. But Mike Burbach used to say, your own best work is in your own best interest. Don't get into office politics. Don't get into things. Keep your focus on you. Your own best work is in your own best interest. And that's what Jim did better than anybody I've ever worked with.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's perfect.
Great final thought, Chuck. Jim, do you have something you'd like to wrap up with before we let you guys go, since we're a little bit over time now?
No, I just would reiterate what Chuck said about you know, learning from everybody involved in this. I just appreciate you guys being here and the questions that you brought, and it's reassuring to me that there's a new crop, you know, as bright as this coming through, because this is, you know, the catch-22 about just how difficult for the news industry is that it's never been more important. I mean, and I really believe that. I mean, I think it's just, you know, cutting through the noise and getting reliable journalism that you can take action upon is just such a precious commodity. And it's a really scary thing to think about this country and without it. I mean, just think about going through the last 18 months without reliable journalism. It's a pretty frightening thought. So I'm pretty heartened by you guys and the passion that you're showing for journalism, and just would wish all of you the best in your endeavors. If anybody ever needs anything from me, please feel free to reach out.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Jim Mustian, Chuck Williams, thank you both so much. This has been illuminating. We look forward to following your work. I've asked all the interns to follow you on social media and read your stuff and watch your stuff. And so we have a few housekeeping items to cover with interns before I cut you guys loose in about 5 minutes. But Chuck and Jim, again, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thanks for having us.